This is Tyler Putman with the Museum of the American Revolution. We're back for another one of our Artisan Field Trips, and today we are visiting someone across the country from Philadelphia. We're with Paul McClintock, a bookbinder in Washington State. Paul, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you became interested in both living history and bookbinding?
Yes, definitely. I was raised in an unusual household, according to some. Pretty normal to me. But my father was a gunsmith. We would take trips out to the woods and pick the perfect tree and fell the tree, and then he would go from there and make the gun to the completed, finished gun. And my mother was also a hearth cook. So we ate a lot of meals from the fire. And we dressed a little weird according to the people in the community. But so that's where I got my start. And as far as the book part of it goes, my father always was a lover of books and always told me that money spent on a book is money not wasted. So I started collecting books. Started getting more into the 18th century books and finding those that were not in the best state of preservation or whatever, and started picking at those and basically doing my own little archaeological digs and finding out how the books were constructed. And then that's how I started getting into the bookbinding aspect of it. The books and the history just came together, and we started doing the bookbinding here at the studio. Then we started doing printed material when we were contacted. Like museums like yourself were needing hands-on material for to be more not locked behind it in a glass case, just bringing it to the public's hands. So we started scanning originals and receiving scans of original books, and then we would clean those up and reprint those, and then I would bind them into a period inspired binding.
I think it's really fascinating how the work you're doing is combining a form of experimental archaeology, investigating original objects and trying to recreate the techniques involved, studying what people were doing in the 18th century, but also maybe the latest technologies. So could you tell us a little bit about what we know about bookbinding in the 1700s and how you go about it today in a way that you feel is efficient and authentic?
Sure. Not a whole lot has changed. We make a joke out of it here on the island. We have a lot of power outages, but I can still work because there's no electricity needed. But as far as the 1700s, I'm inspired a lot by Barclay, Andrew Barclay, a Scotsman that was in Boston at the time, in about the 1760s, I believe, in that time period. I like the techniques that he used, and also the bindings I do are more of a trade binding or a plain binding, nothing on the fancy end where it's the gold leaf or fancy end papers, what have you. I do a lot of blind tooling, and I'm going blank for some reason. I'm so sorry.
No, well, I might ask a quick follow-up and say, so what is blind tooling for those of us who might not be familiar with that phrase?
Blind tooling. If you notice the finer book bindings, you'll see gold leaf decoration on that. Basically what blind tooling is, and I hope to, when we step out to the studio, that I can kind of demonstrate a little bit of that. I've got a book that just came out of the press. It's ready for its final tooling. It's basically the same process, just omitting the gold leaf. So you basically, if you hold the book a certain way, you can see the tooling on it, but it doesn't have the reflection of the gold that's in the decoration as well. So that's what the term blind mind because it's just there, but not quite as flashy as the gold.
That's really interesting. I imagine that some folks watching might have had the opportunity to meet you and see some of your work at Mount Vernon, for example, and sometimes you travel out east, but we're lucky enough to be visiting you at home. And I was wondering if you'd be willing to show us a technique or a part of the bookbinding process here in your home workshop.
Sure, I can do that. In fact, right here, I can pull over the sewing frame and show you the beginning, where we begin with it, from the printed material over to the sewing of the material, or the books. Let me pull the frame over here. I basically do the sewing part in the house because I can watch television and sew at the same time. But I have the frame almost set up here. Let me finish doing a few more things. I'm going to be attaching a cord to the frame using the brass keys. This is the brass key, and I'll be, wrapping the cord around the key and then feeding it up through a slot in the frame and then attaching the line to the crossbar. And if you see here, one more real quick. And what we do is we start from the back of the book and go to the front of the book when sewing. And I'll show you that here as soon as I raise this up to get a little bit of tension across those cords. This is a book. In fact, it's a book that we worked on for the museum here. It's the Wheatley's that we printed up so I could do a little work on that. But we have from the front to the back, I went ahead and pierced the well or the folds of each signature, and these are different signatures here. And that allows me to line up the cord. And we'll get started here. And I'll sew a couple of signatures for you, and then I can show you the finished product here that I already have done. But I take the signature, which this signature is blank for the back. Needle and thread. We use linen thread waxed in beeswax. And the cord that we use to sew these on is hemp as well. So I'm just going to go through real quick. Looping around. And sewing. I don't want to take too much of your time, so what I'm going to do is basically just show you what is actually going on down below, and that is what we end up with here. So this is a cord that is attached to the frame. After we've gone from the back of the book to the front of the book, we clip it free, and then we have the sewn book. Now the cord that you see here we use to attach the boards. These are laced through the paste board. I know earlier they used thin pieces of wood, and which was called a I think a scab panel or a board, scab board binding. But during the 18th century, a little bit later, they started or early to late pasteboard, which is multiple layers of paper that have been pressed together and basically made a board, so they didn't have to use the wood. And that's what we use here in the studio. And this, I'll show you this. This is how the boards are laced to the text block. And then we go over and we cover that with the leather. So it'll kind of give you an idea there. This will be eventually covered with marble paper, and then tooled on the spine a little bit. But we also do full leather, and I can show you that a little bit later when we go do our demo with the blind tooling.
That's really cool, Paul. Can you give us an idea of how long it would take you to make a book like that from the point you've got, I believe they're called the signatures, to the finished product? How many hours of work that might be for one person?
Hours. I always have books in different stages of process, but if I break it down, I'm thinking I could probably do a book of this size here, Wheatley's, in, if I work steadily on it and allowing for dry time and the press, probably a half of a week. Let's say that, depending on the size of the book and what have you. And I remind that is after the printing and everything has been done, and the scanning and all that, the cleanup is prior to that. So. But just the binding part of it itself, I think probably about a half a week I could get the book done.
That's really fascinating. And I bet, I could be wrong, but I think if our audience goes to a shelf in their home, pulls a book off of it, some of those books might still have sewn bindings that they might see, perhaps done by a machine today.
Yes, they have been sewn by a machine. Also in the latter part of the 18th century, they started sewing onto recessed cords. This is what I've been told by some has been called the soundest method. It's on a single raised cord, and that allows what we see today as decoration. Basically, it was a purpose for this. This is also the leather just stretched over the cord that I've sewn the signatures to, so that'll kind of give you an idea there. But the recessed cords, they would cut into the signatures, and then the cord would be recessed and make a flat spine, and then you could go back and decorate the spine however you would like.
That's great. I think it might give people something new to look at on their bookshelves, things that they would have never noticed before.
Definitely.
Paul, I've heard a rumor that you have a pretty bucolic workshop set up, and since you've been gracious enough to show us around your home, I wondered if we could impose on you a little more to see the shop where you work.
Sure, definitely. Just give me a little time and I'll be back with you at the shop.
So we're back with Paul in his workshop.
Yes, this is a small bindery at the what I call the Crown and Book. And when I say small, it's definitely small. It's about 16 by 12. And I have crammed a lot of stuff in here, but I've made it my own little bindery in the woods here in the Pacific Northwest. What you can see behind me here is the beginnings of the workbench. We have the nipping press behind me, and then we have all kinds of other tools there. I have another sewing frame set up in here as well. Then we have a larger press over my shoulder there. And then I have basically my other collection of originals and other stuff on the other side. So, but that's basically it. That's in a nutshell. That's the little bindery in the woods. But let me see if I can put this over here so I can show you a little bit about what I was talking about blind tooling. If you notice here above the nipping press, I have a few what they call rolls hanging off the shelf. I was kindly gifted 16 different rolls from an elderly gentleman here on the island that used to do bookbinding, but no longer does it since he retired. But it has really helped out with the tooling that I do on the books. Now I have here that just came out of the press a volume that is basically just full calf. I use either calf or goat, which I know that the the native bookbinders, that they called them back in the 18th century. The bookbinders that have come over to the colonies used domestic sheep or calf, but we use goat or calf here. And what I'm going to do is basically kind of manipulate the camera here so we can kind of see what I'm doing as far as blind tooling goes. So if you bear with me, I'll move the camera. And let's see here. All right, hopefully you can see what's going to be going on here. I have the, what would normally be a brazier at the time period. I have an electric hot plate that I'm using right now because I don't have the brazier here. I have a brazier on the East Coast because I've kind of divided my workspace between here and the East Coast when I go there to do shows. But I'm going to show you here what we do. So we take the finished, and we have to really make sure we are not too hot here on this iron. And this is a double line. I don't know if you can see it or not. Now it's a little dark, but this will give me, this is what I lay out my lines on the book, kind of as a guide. But you put it on your shoulder. Let me raise this up a little bit. You can rest it on your shoulder as well, and holding on to this, you can get a good stable roll. And then I do the double line around the perimeter of the book. And this is all by eye. And then I'm going to be doing somewhat of my take on a Cambridge panel. Now, I usually do everything by freehand, but I do have a little cheat sheet here. I've used some pasteboard to cut out some different shapes that allows me to not have to measure everything every time that I blind tool something. So I basically use that as a guide to come in and start doing the panel. And I will raise this up and show you my guided lines here, the guidelines that I've laid out. And I'll place another iron on the brazier. But here you can see, hopefully, the lines that has created for my lay lines, I call them, or so unfortunately I didn't have my other iron on the fire, but you can kind of see, and I don't want to take everybody's time, but it's going to have a design on it as well. So I have a sample here. I was mentioning Barkley earlier. I have a sample over here in the in my bookcase of some blind tooling. It's called the herringbone pattern. It is Barkley. It's a Scottish herringbone, and this was actually taken from an example of Barkley's work, and I will find that here in one of my reference books. Maybe it's in the other reference book. Sorry about that. Yes, there we go. But that'll kind of give you an idea of the sample of the herringbone. And so that'll give you, hopefully you can see that all right, an example of our blind tooling. So I think that's it for my end. If that
That sounds great, Paul. I have been joined by a cat, so this was fascinating enough to wake them up from their nap. And I wanted to let people know that we're lucky enough at the Museum of the American Revolution to have both some amazing original 18th century books, a copy of Phillis Wheatley's poems on various subjects, as well as reproductions that you've made of that book, books we use on our privateer sloop. So we're really excited when people come to visit the museum again to show off both those 18th century books and really some fine examples of craftsmanship in the 21st century. So, Paul, if there's somewhere people could find you online to ask more questions or to see more of your work, is there a good place to look for that?
Definitely. On Facebook at From Common Hand Studio, and also on Instagram at bound_in_history, bound in history, and also our website at www.fromcommonhandstudio.com.
That's great. Well, thank you again, Paul, for joining us on this Artisan Field Trip, and we'll look forward to seeing you again soon.
Well, thanks everyone for visiting my humble little abode here in the woods in the Pacific Northwest.